All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started here today. I'd like to welcome you to the 2020-2021 annual business meeting. We are thrilled to have you guys all join us here today. My name's Emily Guglielmo. I'm currently your NCSEA president, and I'm honored to be presiding over the meeting today with a heavy assist from some of my fellow board members and some feature presentations from our two chairs of our communications committee. I have two primary goals for our meeting today. The first one is to give you guys a little summary of last year's efforts, but secondly, to give you a little sneak peek into the coming year's initiatives. With that, I'd like to officially call the meeting to order and briefly give you a snapshot of what we'll be covering today. We're going to open with some of our formalities, roll call and approval of meetings and minutes and agendas. You'll hear from your president, treasurer, and executive director. We'll give you an update on our strategic plan progress, and also our board of directors nominations and elections. We'll touch on a very new initiative for us, which is the NCSEA Foundation. We'd like to give out a few awards here today, including our grants and our public outreach awards. We are going to give you a very consolidated summary of the SCA reports that you all completed with some interesting statistics and facts. Finishing up with a few initiatives in the coming year that we'd like you to be aware of. And then we're going to have a Q&A forum at the end. So I would encourage you to think about your questions throughout the presentation. Feel free to put them in the chat, or you can always, per norm, take yourself off mute at the appropriate time and just shout them out. With that, I'd like to hand it off to Ryan Kirsting.
Thanks, Emily. For today's roll call, we are asking you to rename yourself in the attendee list with the name of your SCA or organization so that we can take roll through that and save ourselves a little bit of time of having to call everybody's name out. By my count, Emily, I'm already seeing that we have a quorum, so I'd like to go ahead and move forward with approval of the agenda and approval of the minutes. So I believe everyone should have received the agenda and the minutes yesterday if you had registered by then. Emily has them up on the screen here for us, and I do need a simple motion either in the chat or in verbal form to approve the agenda as shown. And if I get someone to jump in there real quick in the chat to approve it, and then we'll bring up a quick poll. So here's the poll, assuming we got the motion to approve it. And if you could simply do the answering of the question, do you approve the minutes as shown? Are you in favor or opposed or abstain? And we will be, thank you, Michelle, for the motion. And we will be collecting this poll here in a minute. So if you could quickly answer these questions for us. And Kat, as soon as you see our quorum has reached, I think we can move on. All right, good. Thanks. I know it's a bit procedural and maybe a bit clunky here in the Zoom format, but I appreciate it. And then the minutes from last year, again, you received these yesterday. It was a fairly straightforward business meeting last year. I would say I don't think there was any official changes to bylaws or any of those sorts of things. So a quick motion to approve these, and we'll bring up the poll. And I'm going to thank Michelle in advance for moving it. Thanks, Michelle. And then, Kat, you can bring up the poll. Thank you for getting us through that procedural hurdles. And then one last reminder, if you were joining us late, please take a minute just to rename yourself for this meeting with your SCA at the end of your name. And that will help us make sure we're recording attendance and getting all of our SCAs listed, and we can reach out to those that were not here today. So with that, I'll hand it back.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to take a few minutes to give you guys a formal president's report. I'd like to begin my president's report with a special recognition of a friend and past president, Susie Jorgensen. Susie served on the NCSEA Board of Directors for the past 6 years, including as president this past January through April. Susie was a person who made an unquestionable impact on NCSEA, our SEAs, and our entire structural engineering profession. While her presidential term was tragically shortened, she continued to serve as my quiet confidant and advocate over these last many months. I'm confident that her leadership and vision will continue to guide NCSEA for decades to come. We commit to honoring her by carrying on her legacy of licensure, leadership, and her passion for structural engineering. This past summer, NCSEA issued a call to action to denounce racism and commit to furthering equity, diversity, and inclusion in our profession and our association. While these words represented a critical first step to establishing a vision and a real commitment to accountability, we recognize that it's actions that contribute to meaningful change. To that end, NCSEA publicly pledged to a number of actionable DEI goals. And today I'd like to give you a brief update on the progress of those goals. We are collaborating jointly with SEI and CASE in a newly formed joint DEI committee to increase equity and opportunity across the entire structural engineering profession. Every month, NCSEA compiles and shares resources regarding racism, discrimination, and equity through the Read, Watch, Listen feature in the Structural Connection newsletter. We hosted a DEI visioning and planning session for all NCSEA leadership, including the board, staff, and committee chairs. We offered a 3-part series for all of our members on equity in structural engineering, covering implicit bias, cultural humility, and ways to improve the diversity of our structural engineering pipeline. We've committed to formal partnering agreements with the National Society of Black Engineers, NSBE, and the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, SHIP. We're developing an annual scholarship program for underrepresented students, and our NCSEA SE3 committee has prioritized dissemination of the 2020 SE3 survey data specific to racial equity, including the formation of an already quite active racial equity task committee. But we know that real change takes significant commitment, persistence, and intention. We need your voice and active participation to advance DEI initiatives and fight racial injustice. I strongly believe that NCSEA, our SEAs, and the structural engineering profession are well positioned to improve our communities and contribute to a better future for all. The COVID pandemic underscores the importance of our profession speaking with a unified and collaborative voice. This year, NCSEA, CASE, and SEI committed to developing actions to support the 2019 Joint Vision for the Future of Structural Engineering. In this vision document, the 3 organizations envisioned a future in which structural engineers are widely recognized as vital contributors to the advancement of society. The 3 organizations met on many occasions this past year to discuss how we can implement initiatives ranging from licensure to leadership training, from mentorship to messaging, from public perception to policy development. Please join me and my fellow presidents of CASE and SEI on February 23rd for a virtual town hall open to structural engineers across the country. The goal of the town hall is to inform structural engineers of current and proposed initiatives to advance the profession and to enhance our member engagement. At the end of the session, the presidents will host an open Q&A session to end the town hall. Richard Branson once said, "Every success story is a tale of constant adaptation, revision, and change." By that standard, 2020 was NCSEA's most successful year in history. For all the reasons you're well aware, 2020 epitomized the need for adaptation. We adapted to today's constraints and hosted our first ever virtual summit, which had strong levels of attendees, participation, networking, and engagement. Our programming this year added new offerings to support our membership, including an economic outlook for the structural engineering profession. We partnered with our SEAs to elevate content from a state to a national level, including showcasing the SEOC Wind and Seismic Design Manuals and the SEAOI Bridge Symposium. We continued to focus on fiscal responsibility while prioritizing some of our traditional SEA support programs, such as the grants and the Young Member Scholarships. We expanded our focus to partner with a public relations firm to elevate our profession beyond our traditional audiences. We continue to recognize NCSEA's obligation to develop and train a strong network of leaders at the state and national levels. A little later, you'll hear about the many mechanisms and programs implemented this past year, but I'd like to highlight our first ever SEA Leadership Retreat, which was closely followed by monthly collaboration sessions between SEA leaders. Experts shared their solutions on expanding influence and reach, improving our meetings, events, and education, optimizing our SEA operations, and increasing the engagement of our members. Informative presentations combined with breakout sessions between our SEA leaders have paid dividends with increased problem solving, idea sharing, and network building. NCSEA remains fully committed to discovering the most relevant and resonant mechanisms to connect with our membership. We're making progress with novel learning and networking opportunities, and we're strategically planning for the challenges we face not just today, but in the future. We're particularly pleased you have joined us at our first ever virtual annual business meeting, and I hope that you'll agree that your organization is making great strides to continuously improve both our profession and society. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce NCSEA Treasurer Dave Horos to give the financial report.
Okay, thanks, Emily. As Emily said, I'm David Horos. I'm currently the NCSEA Treasurer. I've been on the board for 3 years. I'm from Illinois, and I served prior to NCSEA on the SCAOI board for about 8 years, including serving as the president there in 2015 and 16. Well, given the events of last year, this year's Treasurer's Report has the potential to be very exciting. But thankfully, I'll say the general takeaway is maybe less so. So what we're going to talk about here is we'll look back to 2019, which seems like a very long time ago, but that's what we typically do when we have our ABM in November. We look at the previous year. So we'll look briefly at 2019, and what you'll see there is it's a strong year, and it's also good because it was more of a standard year. Then we'll look briefly at 2020, which are currently estimates because we just finished it up. And then we'll follow that with a brief comparison between the 2 years, which we normally don't do, but I think given the circumstances, it's fairly informative. So at the end of the day, our goal here is for growth through 2021 to be able to support new initiatives, including some that you will hear about more coming up: PR and marketing, digital assessment and upgrade, and the NCSEA Foundation. So what you see here is a bar chart. In the past, we've used pie charts, but I think we agree that this is probably a better way to present our material, and this is from 2019. On the left is income, on the right is expenses, and for the most part, the colors are meant to map the income and expenses across. That's not always the case. In the case of the gray, dues on the income side and expenses related to board committees and other organizations don't map directly. But if you take a look in general, what you'll see is our budget level about a $1.8 to $1.7 million for 2019, and there was about $100K surplus. So overall, a very good year. And like I said, this is more of a standard year. Continuing ed and publications typically help pay for our operations through our committees and our board. And the summit generally is a break-even scenario, but very important because of recruiting volunteers, networking, continuing ed, et cetera. Okay, so now we'll look at last year. Again, this is an estimate. And what you'll see, if you can see the numbers clearly, and we'll do a comparison in a second, is the estimated income and expenses are about at the $1.2 million range, which we'll talk about here in a second. But again, they're very similar, income and expenses. So we were basically at a break even last year. What stands out immediately is the continuing ed bar on the left. It was really almost half our income last year. And so that is something that we'll talk about more in the fact that made up for the lower income from the summit than what you saw. Equally important is the expense side, being able to reduce our expenses. You know, once we knew what was happening in March, there were obviously some concerns with the revenue side, but we were able to manage our way through with Al's help and Al's guidance and leadership, really, to make sure that we reduced our expenses accordingly. So we finished up 2020 in a good state. So let me now just go to a quick comparison. Now we can see these two at similar scales, and it is quite a drop from 1.8 to 1.2 million. And frankly, we shouldn't be surprised about that given the events of last year. But even considering that, you notice that the blue chart for the income on the right-hand side was actually greater. Our income for continuing ed actually went up, while our overall income and expenses went down to really almost 2/3 of where we were. And that was really something that helped us navigate that difficult year last year. So let me just summarize now here. While it was challenging, we believe 2020 was a success in many ways, including financial. I didn't mention it, but we did transition to a new fiscal year. Our fiscal year now runs from April to March, and we think that works better for us given the timing of our summit towards the end of the calendar year. And we developed a number of new ways to deliver what the SEAs need. And some of these will be discussed by others, but particularly I mentioned the increased e-learning opportunities and the reduction of expenses. So in the future, we'll go back hopefully to reporting our finances during our summit in October, but we'll be doing it based on the new fiscal year. So that's really where we are, and later on we can answer questions if anyone has any. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Al Spada. I'm the Executive Director of NCSEA, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to speak with you today. I'll start my Executive Director report by restating the mission of the Council. NCSEA, in partnership with its member organizations, supports practicing structural engineers to be highly qualified professionals and successful leaders. In the last year, I've thought a lot about these words, especially the ones in red. We know that your SEAs are volunteer-driven organizations. It is critical that NCSEA be there to support your SEA in any way that we can. I'm proud to say that in 2020, NCSEA partnered with SEAs as much as we ever have in history. In the education realm, we've helped 10 different SEAs deliver education programs to their membership. Some were hour-and-a-half presentations, some were multi-day events. When we look at your SEA operations, NCSEA assisted 14 different SEAs as they work through initiatives to improve their day-to-day operations. Some SEAs need to understand how to better host a virtual conference. Some SEAs needed help with transitioning an awards program. Some SEAs needed to evaluate their insurance coverage. What we loved was the ability to step in there, help, and support the SEA behind the scenes, because as volunteers, it's tough to answer some of these questions. We have some experience at NCSEA and want to be able to lend that to your volunteer-driven organizations. Another way we partnered with the SEAs was we continued to deliver volunteer training. Emily mentioned it in her opening president's report, so I don't want to belabor the point, but we pushed out multiple different opportunities, whether it was the leadership retreat, whether it was the multiple Zoom discussions monthly from the NCSEA and Internal Communications Committee. We wanted to push out a bunch of different opportunities to help you advance your SEA. While NCSEA will continue to ask you how we can help you, please, in the future, don't hesitate to reach out with a question or a request to us. That's what we're here for. Please use it, come to us, and see what we can do to continue to help you. Every year-end report requires some type of measuring stick. For me, here are some of the key areas I evaluate to make sure NCSEA is performing as it should. We just heard about the finances, so I'm going to look at it first then from a staff perspective. Last year brought about a lot of change as we had to adapt to a new environment, just like everyone had to on this call, and find new ways to deliver on NCSEA's mission. I'm exceptionally proud of how the staff pivoted almost instantaneously last spring and excelled continuously throughout the year. I can't thank them enough for their efforts to help moving NCSEA forward. Similar thoughts can be expressed about the volunteers that are truly the heart of NCSEA. From the board of directors to the committee chairs to you, the SEA leadership, your support of the profession throughout the environment of the last year has allowed us to adapt and has allowed NCSEA to thrive in the current environment. The key to me, though, with this checklist is to continue to evaluate our success based on the question of, are the SEAs happy with NCSEA? Are our customers happy with NCSEA? That is the question we must continuously ask ourselves ask you, and turn to the data to help answer. So what does the future hold for NCSEA? You've heard about a few of the initiatives. I'm going to talk about a couple of those, and I'm also going to add a few others to that. NCSEA needs to continue to enhance our communication back and forth with the SEAs. We will be holding a first ever focus group discussion on that topic in March, during which we'll be soliciting direct feedback from SEA representatives to determine what is effective and where are there areas for improvement in our communication. Look for an email in the near future detailing this opportunity more. NCSEA is in the process of hiring a PR and marketing firm to help promote the structural engineering profession at both the national and local level. We heard from you that your SEAs need further support as you develop outreach campaigns. There's a tremendous opportunity to deliver a message to so many different audiences outside our profession. By bringing in an expert, we can jumpstart this initiative to deliver the tools your SEA can use. NCSEA will continue to deliver volunteer training for your SEA leadership. Our Internal Communications Committee has great plans for 2021, including the second annual Sca Leadership Retreat and continued monthly discussions on a variety of different topics. Last thing, NCSEA is in the midst of a digital reassessment, so we can upgrade our technology, we can upgrade our software to better serve the needs of the industry and of your SEAs. While this is going to be a multi-year effort and patience is required, the results that we come up with will improve our communication and will improve the ability we have to support you, our SEAs. Ultimately, with any of these projects, the key is to keep increasing the value NCSEA delivers. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you in the future to continue to strengthen the profession.
Thank you, Al. You guys are stuck with me again here for a bit, and one of the topics that we talk about a lot and hopefully resonates with you all as much as it does with me, and that's our strategic plan. NCSEA feels strongly that having a strategy and having a plan is really important. About 18 months ago, we put together our strategic plan, and about 1 year ago, we approved it and presented it to you all at our annual conference. What we've done in the last year is focus heavily on how to implement that plan. I've dragged our board through a many page long action plan, tactic plan that helps us to identify specific ways that we can move this strategy into action. So before I talk about some of those successes this past year, I do want to just remind you of our vision and our mission. And Al has already reminded you of our mission, but there's a few things that are really important here. In our vision statement, we want to make sure that structural engineers are valued for their contributions to not just safe structures, but also resilient communities. Our mission, as you can see, is a partnership. It is not an NCSEA solo effort. It's being done in partnership with all of you to support practicing structural engineers to be qualified professionals and successful leaders. We were very happy to get our strategic plan onto a single page, and what you see here is truly the meat of our plan. So we have 4 primary pillars that we focus and work towards. The first one is education and training. The second 2 fall under the category of perception and professionalism, and we recognize that some component of that is external facing and very advocacy focused. And then a portion of it is a little bit more internal facing. It's about collaboration and creating a mutually positive, supportive environment for everyone. The last pillar of our strategic plan is about codes and standards. We realize it's such a big part of what we do and that there's a role for NCSEA to play there. So hopefully this doesn't look new to you. Hopefully you've seen it a couple of times, but we would encourage you to share it with your SEA and find ways that we can partner towards pushing this mission and vision forward. In the education and training side of our plan, we have advanced many, many initiatives, but I just want to highlight one success story from each of our pillars here today. The first one is something that we have coined the new Grad Initiative. And I would like to start by thanking Kevin Moore and Brian Petruzzi, who are both on the call here today, who said yes when our board reached out about a year ago and asked them to consider this initiative. They have met on a weekly basis for nearly a year to help push this project forward. And the idea between the new Grad Initiative is to remove some of the burden that we would like to ask of our professors and our universities, and acknowledge that they're doing their very best to train students to be graduates when they complete their education. But we realize that as firms and as firm leaders, that there's a pretty significant gap between what we learn in school and what we're expected to be able to do at the beginning of our careers. And so this new Grad Initiative is intended to fill that gap. I've given you two examples here. They're the obvious two of masonry and wood. And we've actually targeted masonry as our very first module. So we're putting together a brand new platform that will allow our members and our SEAs to go ahead and train their new grads in a way that allows them to be very productive in their early stages of their career. We look forward to sharing more of the actual platform and the various modules that are being developed in the future, but this has been a very significant undertaking, and I wanted you guys to be aware of the behind the scenes efforts. As I mentioned before, pillar 2 is regarding perception and professionalism, and the external facing side of that revolves around advocacy. And while our external communications committee has many successes here, and you'll hear about a few of them later on, I want to reiterate what Al told you a few minutes ago and what I hinted at in my president's address. And that is, we have committed to partnering with a PR and marketing firm. You'll hear much more about it in the coming months, but we believe strongly that we've spent many years talking about how we can have a stronger voice outside of our profession, and we've struggled with ways to implement that. So we've acknowledged our deficiencies as a profession, and we've gone and brought in expert help. And so we're very excited not just to figure out what this looks like at a national scale, but to also figure out how we can implement these strategies at a local SCA level. In terms of the internal side of things, again, our internal communications committee has many success stories, as do a lot of our committees, in creating a very positive environment that we can practice in. What I would like to highlight today is a little bit of a reminder of what I mentioned in my president's address, and that is that our board this year has heavily prioritized our drive to create a mutually and supportive environment for everyone in the profession and an equal opportunity for all people to enter our profession. And I would encourage you, if you didn't have the opportunity to watch our 3-part series, they are posted on our website. These are resources you're welcome to share with your SEAs. We're trying to take the lead at a national level, but we hope that at a regional or a state level that you guys are taking these tools and helping to implement change. Our last pillar revolves around codes and standards. And as you know, we have a very active code advisory committee. I could share many, many success stories, but I want to highlight that this initiative really has 2 components to it. The first one is a desire to positively influence codes and standards. So let's call that the front end of a code and standard. And the second one is to help with the proper application of codes and standards. So that's more of on the back end. As an example of the front end, we recognize that NCSEA will never write codes and standards. SEI, ASE is very good at that, but we are looking at strategies to partner. And one success story this past year, we NCSEA put a formal seat on the snow load committee. As many of you know, ASC 722 will have a revamp of the snow load maps. And we put a representative on that committee. We reached out to all of our SEAs. We involved our snow heavy SEAs in getting feedback. What do you want that map to look like? What data is important to you to be part of that process? So for one of the very first times, NCSEA had a very key role in influencing the front end of a code and standard. In terms of the back end, implementing a code and standard, we took a very heavy focus at this year's summit on helping our members and practicing engineers with proper applications of codes. We brought in SEI to do a series on future code change provisions. We provided a highlight on various directions of performance-based codes and standards. So hopefully I've communicated to you or convinced you that we take this planning very seriously, and not just the planning, but the implementing. We realized that this is a long plan, but we did feel very strongly that we wanted to have strong successes in this first year. So with that, I would like to ask Kat to go ahead and launch a poll. Make sure you guys aren't asleep. I'm interested in which of these initiatives I just introduced to you is the most beneficial for your SCA. And for this particular question, you have to pick your very favorite initiative. And I will promise you that we are going to continue to push all of them forward, but we'd like to get a little bit of feedback from you here.
Hey, Emily, if I could just fill the minute while we're waiting for the poll results to come in. This would also be a good time to remind people we do have time for Q&A later in the session. But if you wanted to start adding some of those questions in the chat now, you can feel free to do so. We will save them to the end, but it will help us plan. If you have questions, feel free to add them to the chat.
Thanks, Ryan. All right. I'm happy to report that we have some nice parity, that we have a lot of interest in each of the initiatives. I do see codes and standards sneaking ahead of the rest. I'll make sure to hand that off to Tom DeBlasi, our Codes Advisory Committee Chair. And I'd like to thank you for your engagement in our implementation of our strategic plan.
Hey everybody, I'm Ed Questenberry, Vice President of NCSCA, standing firmly in the shadow of our leader, Emily, this year. I am going to be presenting here the next few slides related to two items that you all should be very familiar with by now because your email inbox has been inundated with mails from NCSCA about them. One is the nominations process and the slating of officers for the 2021 Board of Directors. And the second is the NCSCA Foundation. I'll cover the nominations process first. I wanted to start off with talking a little bit about how the nominating committee was formed, because it was a little bit different this year than previous years. The composition of the nominating committee, it's chaired typically by the vice president of the organizations, which this year it's me. And we also have the past president as a voting member because that person has been through the process before at least once and has a good sense of the types of folks that we're looking for on the board. So those are two given positions. The other appointed position would be committee, NCSCA committee chair. And this year it was Angelina Stazoulis from Georgia. So she joined John Schmidt and I as, I guess, the appointed people on the committee. Then this year, the bylaws were changed to require that the 3 delegate positions on the nominating committee were voted on and nominated and voted on by the SEAs. So this year we sent out a call to all of you for nominations for the nominating committee, and we received several nominations, and these 3 folks were selected: Jonathan Hernandez from New York, Bill Hrinko from Alaska, and Chris Snyder from Oklahoma. So these were all approved by the SEAs and were seated on the nominating committee. The last member of the nominating committee was Ryan Kirsting. He was a non-voting member, but it's felt that he'll be running the process in a couple of years. So we feel it's important as a board for the sake of continuity to have have that seat on the nominating committee. But again, he was an observer and a non-voting member. So, but I wanted to thank all of these people. We had several meetings, virtual meetings, and some really valuable discussions over the candidates. And it was just a really great group, collaborative group with lots of great viewpoints and differing opinions, but we all at the end came to some consensus. So I wanted to thank these people. So this is the slate that I'd like to announce. You guys have probably already seen, the ballots have gone out. So you've probably already seen this. I'm just reviewing at this point, but wanted to talk a little bit about the positions that were open on the board this year, and how we went about determining this slate. So Dave Horos, first and foremost, is slated as vice president. In keeping with tradition. The board member that has served 2 years as either secretary or treasurer is normally moved up into the VP role, and that Dave is serving his year as treasurer this year and will be moved into that position. The second is the treasurer spot became open because neither one of the second-year directors currently on the board, that would be Paul Riley or Rick Boggs, elected to move forward into that position. So that created a vacancy that we had to fill through this nominating process. And the nominating committee felt very strongly that the person to be slated for this position should have prior board, NCSEA board experience. Because normally this slot would be filled by someone who's already been on the board for 2 years. And so we went back through the roster of prior directors that did not continue on the board over the last 5 or 6 years. And Chris Serino's name came up and was the clear clear standout among all of them. And so he was slated for the treasurer position. Then we have the two first-year director positions that were open. And here we were really looking for, we were really pushing for representation from regions of the United States that were underrepresented on the board currently. And we're pretty West Coast heavy right now. And so we're proud to announce that we were able to get nominations of these two people, Sarah Appleton from Georgia and Brian Pertuzzi from Metro DC, two very good candidates with strong backgrounds of leadership in their member organizations and within NCSEA. So we feel like this is a very strong slate. The nominating committee is very excited about it and was very unanimous about this slate. So we hope that you all are happy with this, and we're requesting the ballots back by February 12th. So please make sure you meet with your member boards and get those votes in. Second is the NCSEA Foundation. This was established in 2020, and the primary reason this was formed was to provide a funding mechanism for initiatives from our SEAs and within NCSEA that could be kind of a standalone funding source. And so this is all donation based, and it's the mission of it is to fund initiatives that support the practice of structural engineering. So that covers outreach, research, development of publications, and arrangement of events, organization of events that support the practice of structural engineering. We're very proud to announce that the current initiatives that are being funded by the foundation, that were the DEI webinar series that Emily mentioned previously, the scholarship program that is in development currently, and the MO grant program that's been going on for the last few years, but that will be funded out of the foundation. This, again, is 100% donation based, and you all have been getting emails soliciting donations. I'd like to give a shameless plug to reach into your wallet and cut a check to the NCSEA Foundation so that we can continue to support the structural engineering profession in the future. Thank you.
Okay, this is Dave again. And following up on what Ed was referring to on the foundation and the grants, I'm going to have the pleasure of announcing this year's grant winners. But before I do that, just a bit of a background on the program itself. It's now about 6 years old, and the grants are awarded annually pending available funds. And I believe we've been pretty successful to be able to award them annually thus far. And it was very important to the board and also now to the foundation that we be able to continue that last year, despite the difficulties. And we're happy that we were able to do that. And so similarly to what Ed mentioned, the grants are to assist the SCAs in strengthening the profession. This year's awards will range, or typically, not this year so much, but in general range between $250 and $5,000. And we've been able to award over $10,000 last year, a total of greater than $70,000 in the history of the program. So with no further ado, we will announce this year's grant recipients. The first recipient is SEAC, SEAC Colorado, for an initiative related to launching their SE3 committee. The next grant is for Illinois, SEAOI, a combination of STEM videos and remote site visits. Next, Utah, SEAU, a seismic study on the Wasatch Front, followed by Sca, Northern California, an SE3 DEI firm leader cohort, which has a lot of potential. And I will, okay, keep going. I will, while I'm talking, I'll just say that one of the goals of this program is to try to award grants to SEAs who are able to almost do pilot projects that then can be shared amongst other SEAs in the future. And as I see some of the SE3 items there, I note to myself how SE3 started in Sca and then has moved across many of the MOs. So just keep that in mind. Okay, back to the awards. SEAOA Ohio, a student scholarship, and the interesting part related to that was it was for virtual participation, given the fact that it's 2020, and there are plenty of opportunities for students to participate virtually that may not exist if they're having to go to meet in person. And the next, and I believe the last, is Seacom, Kansas and Missouri, an award for student outreach and the MOLA Model Initiative. So I want to congratulate all of 2021's grant recipients. I want to encourage all the MOs to continue participating because we think this is a great way for now the foundation to give back to the profession through the MOs. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Dave. My name's Angelina Stasulis. I chair the External Communications Committee. Last year, NCSEA had its first public outreach challenge, recognizing structural engineer associations who gave a voice to the profession, hence the golden megaphone that you can see, which was last year's award. Essentially improving our visibility and recognition through news articles, videos, blogs, etc. Based on the submissions we received last year, the committee chose to modify this year's challenge a little bit in order to recognize efforts in different categories, including public outreach, meaning the general public at large, political advocacy, students and educators, and kind of an other category, which is related to current NCSEA initiatives, which this year you heard focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and collaboration with other industry organizations. All of these relate back to NCSEA's target audiences from the strategic plan Emily presented earlier. This year's winners are, in the category of public outreach, SEAW, Washington. Washington's entry highlighted their lecture series, which presented structural engineering topics to a wider audience. This year, they rose to the challenge presented by COVID and expanded their reach to multiple continents via a well-designed virtual forum. Their execution of collaborating and cooperating with other organizations ranging from universities' engineering and architecture departments to other SEAs and even materials organizations, getting published in various news sources, and self-advertising on a widely followed social media platforms was really impressive, and to the committee demonstrated the ability of structural engineers to capture the interest and attention of the masses, even when faced with incredible constraints and limitations. In the category of students and educators, SEACOM was awarded the award for this year. At the beginning of 2020, SEACOM received a grant from NCSEA, which you just heard Dave mention. This grant was to help a local elementary school with a weekly student STEM learning activity. and they chose to provide these magnetic MOLA magnetic structural model kits. This idea actually blossomed from helping one school's after-school program to an entire district, and then expand it further to a larger collective effort with NCSEA to partner with MOLA models, developing lesson plans, activities, and exercises that we hope structural engineers can use to partner with schools across the country in a national program. In the category of political advocacy, SEAW. SEAW presented a comprehensive look at their impressive integration with legislative boards dealing with building codes, licensure, and disaster response. Through their involvement in multiple committees and councils, they've been recognized as an example of how structural engineers can be serving as resources and trusted advisors to different government agencies. And finally, our winner for the other initiatives related to NCSEA's current goals, SEAC. SEAC submission demonstrated a clear response to NCSEA's earlier call for action. They have a flourishing and active committee, SE3, dedicated to supporting DEI initiatives through successful mentoring programs, roundtable discussions, events, forums, and presentations. They've also promoted and created opportunities with ally organizations to empower local leaders and community members with an understanding of structural engineers' ability to impact and support their communities. They also offer substantial documentation of their efforts and funding commitment to scholarships and sponsorship and publication of different scientific studies, papers, reports, and other items of special importance and significance to structural engineers. We hope that the SEA's programs can become prototypes for other organizations programming in the future. We'll be featuring them in future NCSEA communications, both in print and virtually. Additionally, we'd like to congratulate all of our winners. Category winners will also be receiving several of the MOLA structural kits that we mentioned earlier in this presentation to help them with their further outreach activities, and we'll be contacting them after this presentation to award distribution.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Ryland and I'm the delegate for Illinois, but I also co-chair the Internal Communications Committee with Rob Butterfield. I'll be presenting the summary results of the Sca Report. If you do have a question about something that I cover, please throw it in the chat and we will cover it during the Q&A portion at the end of the meeting. First, I want to mention what the following data is based on. As you know, we have 44 member organizations, and some of those organizations, like California, are pretty large. And we realized a few years ago that just having one Sca report from California was not capturing all of the data. So for the last couple of years, we have invited California's 4 regional organizations to submit Sca reports as well. So full participation is 48 reports, and we received 41. And I just want to mention that, you know, the data that we're pulling from here, we are creating actionable items from this data. And if you want your voice heard, I just really encourage you to submit your reports. So this slide is covering, you know, the various MOs and how the years their delegates have served. And so what you'll see is that about half of the SEAs have fairly new delegates serving just a couple of years. We have a small handful that have served for decades, very impressive. Some organizations have a new delegate every single year. There's really no right way to do this. We don't have a perfect formula, but what we can do is to make sure that you're connected with each other so you can determine what works best for your SEA. Years served as an alternate delegate. So not every SEA utilizes the alternate delegate. And if you don't, I'd encourage you to consider the power of the alternate delegate. You have double everything. You have 2 voices to speak up for your SEA, 2 engineering brains to think about the issues, 2 sets of eyes and ears to absorb the information and take it back to your state boards, all for the benefit of your organization. So, and the SEAs that do have an alternate delegate have found it valuable. All right, this is the range of dues that each SEA charges their members. This includes individual dues as well as the couple of organizations that have a corporate dues set up. The highs and lows, the high of $315 and low of $40 is exactly the same as last year. And the sweet spot is right around $100. The takeaway that I will leave you with is that you can only be as active as you have resources for. this slide, did the number of members increase, decrease, or stay the same during the past year? All right, let's focus on the positive first. The 16% of our SCAs had increased membership and nearly a third were stable. But then the other side is the sobering reality that more than half of our SCAs saw their membership numbers drop in this last year. This is an obvious impact of the pandemic. And so what are NCSEA's next steps? Well, the handful of SCAs that had a pretty substantial drop, I mean, you can see the range of decreases in membership range from a pretty negligible 2% all the way up to 70%, which was from a fairly small MO. But still, there were quite a few SCAs that had double-digit decreases. And you can expect that we'll be reaching out to you specifically to see how we can assist you in providing that value back to your members and hopefully get those numbers back up in 2021. But don't feel like you have to wait for us to call you first. If you know that you need help, please reach out. All right, primary source of revenue. So what this data is telling us is that nearly 2/3 or right at 2/3 of our SCAs rely on dues as their primary funding source. They're so important and to maintaining the membership value so that the dues are worth it to your potential members. That is a critical thing to maintain. Did your SCA offer any of the following programs in the past 12 months? Lunch and learns, dinner meetings, full or half-day seminars, annual conference, other, whether in person in the beginning of last year or virtual. What this data is showing that nearly everyone is trying to do something. So that is encouraging. There's a small handful, 2 or 3 organizations that just haven't been able to get a program off the ground. And that is understandable, obviously, during this last year. So how can NCSEA help you change that, get an event going in the next couple months? Does your SCA have an awards program? So it's about 50-50 split right now. There is a slight increase in the percentage of SCAs with an awards program in comparison to last year. For those of you organizations who don't have an awards program, just remember that it can be used as a revenue stream, and it can also provide some really great PR content for your SCA. There are a lot of success stories from SCAs that have started an awards program based on the format of NCSEA's Excellence in Structural Engineering Awards Program. And we can obviously provide you that information to starting one if you're interested. But this also provides a very easy conduit to elevate your state winners up to the national platform. So I would expect a follow-up conversation on Basecamp about this topic. Has your SCA collaborated with another SCA or NCSEA regarding an event or program? Really, the point of us asking this question was to find out, can you talk to your neighbors? And I'm not talking about the person that lives next door to you. I'm talking about your neighboring states. Everything is virtual now. We know that. I'm not going to belabor the point, but geography is no longer a barrier. Everyone is struggling. But the small SCAs are struggling even more. So is this a time where some of the larger organizations can step up and help out those smaller SCAs? One way to potentially do that is share your membership rates to your virtual network, your virtual programming to your smaller neighboring SCAs. And I know that there are SCAs that are doing this. And okay, yeah, so just final point on this slide is that if you are a smaller organization that would appreciate some collaboration or assistance from a larger SCA potentially, please speak up and let us know that this is something that you're interested in. Student chapter support, again, roughly a 50-50 split between organizations that support a student chapter. We do have the resources to help you set up new student chapters and lots of success stories to share. And if you're only interested in putting together a presentation, our Students and Educators group has resources for that as well. So again, expect a follow-up conversation in Basecamp on this topic. Does your SCA have a scholarship program? So we added this question as a follow-up to a communication webinar that we had back in July or August, where 3 organizations, Massachusetts, Indiana, and Alabama, discussed the different ways their scholarships are set up. And this webinar was recorded and it is available for free if you missed it and would like to view it. So it was really great to see that over half of our SCAs do have established scholarship programs and were willing to share their various scholarship criteria and sample applications with us. And of the SCAs that don't have an existing program, 7 are interested in starting one. So that was encouraging to see. And so what we're going to be doing is compiling all of these sample applications and information and sharing that with you on Basecamp so you can kind of sort through the information and see what works for your particular organization. What social media platforms has your SCA used? Didn't really see a huge surprise here in the distribution of social media platform usage. Really no surprise that LinkedIn was the highest utilized one and Facebook was a close second. Some SCAs did indicate that it's only their young member groups that have a presence and it's not the full organization. That's fine. And the none, which is the top bar, most generally every one of the responses that indicated they didn't have a presence was because no one has volunteered to champion that effort, which is understandable. This is a volunteer organization. Our boards are all volunteer based. And so it's hard to add something else to your plate. So if you haven't tried this yet, I would recommend trying the micro volunteering approach among your membership. And I would suggest going to your membership and look outside your existing board of directors. So if you've never heard this term before, micro volunteering is like a dedicated recruitment tactic, if you want to call it that, that's very detailed and specific. So for example, you could send out an email blast and that says, you know, the SCA of such and such state is looking for a small group of volunteers, doesn't have to be just one, to donate 1 hour per week to create and maintain a social media account for our organization. So it's specific, it's telling exactly what you're looking for and the time commitment. And I bet you'll get some people say, oh, they're 1 hour a week. That's something that I can put in and support my organization with that time. And if you've forgotten, let me remind you that the External Communications Committee has developed a social media guide for this exact purpose. So please take advantage of that. Right. Has your SCA contacted NCSCA for assistance or guidance in the last 12 months? This is an important question because this is literally why NCSCA exists, to help you. This has been trending in the positive direction in recent years, but there was definitely an uptick this last year, obviously. Many of you reached out for assistance with virtual programming, whether to work through the logistics of hosting a virtual event or to even use NCSCA's platform to host your own event. If your SCA is part of the 24% who hasn't reached out to NCSCA this last year, I really encourage you to contact Leo or Al or really anyone on the staff, but Leo's your point person. And if you're not aware of a specific need, I guarantee you that you'll walk away from your conversation with ideas of how NCSCA can help your SCA improve and succeed. Okay, the best way for NCSCA to communicate with your SCA. We asked this question because we wanted to understand if the current communication setup, or the delegate model, I will call it, is working for all of the SCAs, if it's effective. And we found out that for some, it's not. We had 41 reports and only 35 indicated that the delegate was the preferred and only method of contact. So, and several organizations indicated at least 2 points of contact, and a couple said, please contact, 3 or more people on our boards to keep us all in the loop. So moving forward, NCSE will be modifying the distribution list to account for each SCA's specific preference. And we will also be considering adding SCA leadership to the Delegate Basecamp group. This has been mentioned a couple of times so far this meeting, but NCSEA is committed to improving the communication pipeline at the delegate level, at the executive director level, if your organization happens to have an executive director, and at the committee level. And this is specifically why we are creating the focus group that Al mentioned earlier. And so once that occurs in March, I believe he mentioned, we will be reporting back to you with our findings on that. Okay, so the SCA report ended with a couple of open-ended questions regarding outreach and impacts of the pandemic. We have all of those comments and are definitely paying attention to the specific items that you shared with us. COVID-19 has forced us to change the way we do things. We've mentioned this so far, I'm not going to belabor the point, but some of those things are actually working kind of well. And so when things return to normal in 3 months, 6 months, or hopefully not all the way in 2022, I mean, do we revert back to our old way of doing things? Or do we have an opportunity to continue to provide a better value to our members with a hybrid approach to our programs, our events, and our operations? And then the very last question was, is there anything NCSEA can do to help your SCA in the coming year? Many of you had some really great responses and ideas, and we've tried to collect, combine, and summarize most of those thoughts here. Obviously, pandemic-related support was a high priority for many of you. Support in addressing social issues, various DEI initiatives, continued connections with other SCAs of sharing ideas and success stories, engaging vendors and sponsors. How do you prove your value to a sponsor, a potential sponsor, to get them to support your specific event? Assistance with selecting presenters for various virtual events, and supporting different organizations with the administrative tasks of an organization. Sometimes that admin part just takes up so much and there's not a lot of bandwidth left to focus on other initiatives. So that's kind of the conclusion of the report summary. We do have a quick question for you. I know I've been talking for a long time, so Kat, thank you for putting up that poll. So I mentioned a couple of initiatives we'll be following up on, and I just would like to know which ones you would like to see information on, and you may select more than one option. Membership support, starting a student chapter, starting a scholarship program, an awards program, starting an annual conference, or improving communications with NCSEA. Okay, so it looks like we've a couple of initiatives are popping to the top. Membership support, that's no surprise there. Improving communications with NCSEA, we know that's something we need to work on. Starting a student chapter or a scholarship program has some good interest. An awards program and annual conference as well, but not as much. So, so thank you all for those, your opinions on that. We will definitely take that into account when we are planning this upcoming year and where we're putting our efforts. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Michelle. And it's my turn again. For those who might have missed earlier, I'm Ryan Kirsting from California. I'm serving as secretary of the NCSEA board right now. And you've been hearing a number of initiatives that have been the focus of our board, our staff, our committees, really have been focused on the SCAs. I just want to try to consolidate those here in a couple of slides just to make sure you haven't missed anything and to give you an opportunity to think about which of these might be of interest to you in the coming year. Kind of much like Michelle's last poll, but a little bit different. So the board has really been working with staff to support SCAs individually on a number of fronts. You can see these here with joint meetings, offering training or presentations to your SCA leaders and meetings. We've been doing a lot of assistance. You've heard of Al mention a lot of assistance on the backside of virtual programming and some marketing activities. And we expect that to continue in the coming year as well. Internal Communications Committee has been extremely involved in developing and refining the tools for the SCAs and delegates to be using. We have the regular communication webinars, and we're very active in the Basecamp forum. You know that we had this the SCA Leadership Retreat earlier in the year, and I'll mention our plans for 2021 here in a minute. We've also worked on updating the webpage. So on the member portal side of things of the NCSEA webpage, we've been consolidating the tools for the SCA. I think you'll remember that the good work that was done to create the MO toolkit, but we started to notice some of the resources being spread out a little bit. And so we consolidate these all into one spot for you to easily access and use under this tools tab of the member portal. And it also includes a number of the other resources that have been developed by the other committees, such as the social media guide, the student chapter startup guide, the SE3 startup guide, and some of the STEM resources as well. So I'd encourage you to, if you haven't lately, to go to the member portal website and look at how we've consolidated the resources for you to use there. On the virtual leadership retreat, we are planning that again for 2021. And again, this is something that has been an expansion of the success of the delegate collaboration activities, and it's open to all SCA leaders. We're planning that to be in April. The dates will be announced soon. And it really will be the opportunity for you to connect with other leaders of the other SCAs, as well as hear about topics that are pertinent to you. So as the poll was suggesting that Michelle just conducted a few minutes ago, we need to hear from you about the topics that are important to you. We know a lot of the common themes are there, and we will be addressing those in the upcoming virtual leadership retreat. And then speaking of other events, in addition to the leadership retreat, you heard Emily mention the joint town hall that's coming up in February. And we are, of course, are planning the October NCSEA Summit in New York, sort of right now as being a hybrid virtual and in-person option. And you'll be hearing more about that in the coming months. So just as a quick recap, those were the ideas and the initiatives we have being planned for the coming year. I think we had one last poll that we can throw up as we prepare some questions. If there was anything, Kat, if you throw the poll up, if there's anything that strikes you as the most interest of you and the most exciting of those initiatives that we've been offering, whether it's the leadership retreat, the one-on-one support, the summit, or some of the regular communication webinars, we'd appreciate your feedback on the poll. Great. Well, I'm glad to see the interest in the summit. I think we would all love to be celebrating in New York in person, but I also think we did a really good job with the virtual event this year too. And so I think the summit continues to be a shining star, but I think we've also done some good work with the leadership retreat too. So I really am excited about both those events. And of course, we'll continue to offer the rest of the regular assistance and to the SCAs as needed. All right, thanks, Kat. So with that, we are going to go to some Q&A. And I've had a couple sent to me directly, and I've kind of seen a few going in the chat that I've collected on the side here. So I'll start, it's diving a little bit deep into the weeds, but I'll go ahead and start with a couple of easy ones, and then I'll hand off to Dave for a couple on the Treasurer's report. Want to make sure that you all know we will make this presentation available to you afterwards in terms of PDFs of the slides. And then I think, Michelle, I think you covered this one a little bit, so I don't know if it got covered and was asked before you covered it. What percentage of SCAs have alternate delegates? I think you mentioned the number. I'm not sure if you could roughly say, is it half of them? Is it under half?
It's probably about 2/3. We didn't actually compare those numbers, but I would say it's about 2/3.
Good. All right, so Dave, I'm going to throw a couple to you now. Someone was looking at your charts and caught real quick that the 2020 summit might have had a little bit more expense than it had as income. And so just, is there anything you wanted to elaborate on the expenses for the virtual summit?
Sure, I can do that. And I don't know if it's worth putting those back up, because there was a statement I was going to make as I thought about what I was saying that I would like to add to what I mentioned. And part of the answer, if not all the answer, is when you look at expenses, what you don't see anywhere is a category for staff expenses, staff benefits, rent, any other kind of operating expenses that NCSEA needs. So Al can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe what's happening is all those expenses are being distributed across these categories based on time that's being spent by the staff. So in the case of the summit, despite the fact that it was virtual, there still was considerable staff time spent on putting the summit together. And that is why those expenses are what they are. Similarly, some of the continuing ed and other elements include staff expenses. And I don't know if that helps answer that question, but that's where I would start.
Good. I think that covers kind of both those questions. Al, did you feel the need to add anything, or Dave got it covered okay?
Nothing else to add. Dave did a great job.
Okay. Thanks, Al. A question for Ed on the foundation. Just out of curiosity, they noticed the foundation was separate, or at least who oversees the foundation and who makes decisions about the foundation? If you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, sure. Great question. We, for the sake of efficiency and I guess continuity of vision and mission, the board of directors for NCSEA serves as the board of directors for the foundation. So that is how the bylaws for the foundation are set up. So it provided kind of an immediate and kind of regular infrastructure for the foundation organization. So we don't have to run them separately, like, you know, from an election standpoint and all of that. So it's a relatively straightforward format, and it maps to several of our SEAs have foundations as well, and we drew from that, and I think some of those foundations have the same leadership structure where the board of the SEA is the board for the foundation. So we kind of didn't want to reinvent the wheel either. Did I answer?
I think you got it. I was looking at the chat screen too, so I just maybe was distracted. And I think the reason they're separate is for the 501c3 purposes, right? Maybe you covered that.
Oh yeah, I guess I forgot to address the separate part of the question, but yeah. And the 501c3 is set up so that, you know, donations can be tax deductible, and so it's an incentive, and it's a marketing tool that NCSEA can use to solicit donations. So. Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Ed. Emily, I might throw this next one to you to start out with. We heard a little bit about the nomination process being different. If someone was interested in getting involved with the board or being part of the nominating committee, how do they get better involved with that?
Sure, thanks, Ryan. And I'll stick with the board part of that question. And then Ed, I'll punt to you the nominating committee portion. But in terms of getting more involved with the board, our board meetings are for the most part open. And so if you're interested in attending a board meeting or reading about what we've done in a board meeting, this is information we would love to share with you. I would argue that our whole last year we've summarized for you in about 60 minutes here. But we are all about open lines of communication and transparency. So if you are interested in participating, interacting with, making recommendations to our board, you have a direct line of communication. Each MO is assigned a board liaison. So hopefully you know who your board liaison is. And the staff, particularly Al and Leo, are also direct conduit. So love the comments and would love any feedback you have for us at a board level.
Ed, do you want to talk about how to get more involved in the nominating committee or that side of the question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, just like your SEAs, it's 100% volunteer organizations, right? And so, you know, the success of NCSEA thrives on or depends on volunteerism. So if you want to get involved, if you want to be on the nominating committee in the future or be nominated for a board position, I think it's important to get involved in your local SEA and be a contributor, be a leader, and express your interest in these positions and this kind of advancement, and just get involved. And that's basically it. But at the end of the day, it's all volunteer, and so you have to have that passion for it. And so just step up and you'll be recognized.
Great. There's a quick follow-up here from Steve in the chat about how do we find out who our board liaison is? And Emily, I'll just get to take it. You can correct me if I'm wrong. It should be on the website. So on the NCSEA website, where you go and look at members and member organizations, it lists all the organizations and lists the contact for your organization, as well as the board liaison from the NCSEA board, so your liaison. And Steve, I'm writing your name down just to make sure that we reach out to you to make sure you know who your particular liaison is. All right, with that, and thanks, Kat, for jumping in the chat there for it, Sue. With that, I don't know if Emily or Ed, you guys want to kind of arm wrestle this one or not. We heard a little bit about the PR consultant and some of the PR activities. Is there an opportunity for folks to get involved or just kind of help shape what that PR committee or consultants can be working on?
I don't like to arm wrestle Emily for anything, but because I lose every time. But I will take it on. Yeah. So this is brand new for us here at NCSEA. It's a really big deal. So the initial phase of this PR initiative is going to be kind of a investigative phase. So the company that NCSEA has retained to assist us with this will be reaching out to SCAs and to the NCSEA board and staff to kind of canvass and find out what the hot buttons are for outreach. So there will be, likely there will be some requests made of you here in Q2 of 2021 as this campaign kicks off. Beyond that, you know, when it comes to forming the plan, we're very much going to be, the PR company is going to be very much driving that. And so I could envision needing to form some sort of an ad hoc committee to be responsive to them as we start developing the implementation plan for this. So there will probably be opportunities for people that are interested to step up. I would encourage anybody who's interested in this type of thing to join the External Communications Committee and start attending those meetings and getting up to speed with the initiatives that we're working on currently. And because that's probably where the board is going to be looking for volunteers to be active in that ad hoc committee.
Good, thanks, Ed. Emily, I see you're muted, so I'm assuming you're not going to add anything else. I will say that Angelina dropped something in there. She's our chair of the External Communications Committee, so if you're interested in getting involved, you have her email in the chat. I think we're pretty close to caught up on the questions in the chat screen. So if you had any final questions, now would be the good time to drop them in the chat or even unmute and feel free to add a comment or question real time live.
And I'll take this chance. I'm not sure if I got this one directly, but I had a question about the joint NCSEA-SEI case town hall. The question was a reminder of the date and is it open to all members of SEAs? So as a reminder of the date, it's here on the screen. We are just finishing up our marketing material to push it out to members. So you will see that very, very soon. And if you're a member of NCSEA and CASE and SEI, you may see it many times because we really want this to be something that's for the profession. So any engineer, doesn't matter what organization you belong to, what state you live in, any structural engineer is allowed and encouraged to join this free town hall event. And this is really the first time we've done this. I mentioned in my president's address this importance of collaboration, and one of our biggest successes this year truly is being totally lockstep aligned, pulling in the same direction as CASE and SEI. So we're really excited to share some of those joint initiatives with all structural engineers.
Great. Well, I had one more question that I think I can handle. The question was, how do we hear about what the committees are working on? And they know that this has been part of the summit in the kind of the summit delegate meetings and or business meeting in the past. And so just to kind of clarify, we know we have we have some changes to the schedule and we're grouping things into different meetings. Committee reports are generally going to be addressed in the leadership event. That's the kind of strategy right now. So we had a little bit of a committee update in some sense earlier in the year. We're planning on having committee updates for their 2020 activities and plans for 21 at the Sca Leadership Retreat coming up in April. So that would be when you hear a little bit more about the committees. All right, Emily, I think we've caught up with questions, so I will hand it back to you.
Thanks, Ryan. And as we formally close our business meeting here today, I really do want to thank each and every one of you, not just for attending, but honestly, even more so for your efforts in the past year, your leadership, your service, your vision within your SCA and NCSEA. And while we won't pretend that 2020 wasn't challenging, I do think that structural engineers are pretty uniquely positioned to affect change and to improve our communities, our profession, and the public at large. So I would just like to thank you for your attendance here today and officially close our annual business meeting.